Hello, everybody, and welcome to Tandem Coaching Academy's Keeping Agile Coaching Non-Denominational podcast. We are your hosts today, Sheree Silas and I, Alex Goodenough. And today we have more than one guest. Today we have Gereon Hermkes and Q, and they are authors, agile coaches slash advisors, whatever that means. And today we're talking about scrumming at scale. So, Gereon, Q, why don't you introduce yourself to our listeners?
Okay, so why don't I go first? My name is Gereon. I'm from Berlin, Germany, born and raised. And as you guys know, I consider myself to be a reluctant coach of sorts. So I'm originally a Scrum Master and kind of still feel like it, even though I do mainly coaching today. And so I'm a Scrum trainer under Jeff Sutherland and also a Kanban trainer. And I mainly do some training and then agile coaching, specifically around scaling Scrum.
My name is Luiz Quintela. I go by Q. I'm based in Washington, D.C. I used to split my time between the US and Europe before COVID. Now it's mostly US and a little bit of Europe. And I'm an Agile advisor and trainer. I'm a Scrum trainer, Scrum at Scale trainer under Dr. Jeff Sutherland. And been doing Scrum since about early 2006.
That's a lot of scrumming.
I know.
So as I'm thinking about scrumming, this thing, and I don't remember who said that, but it seems like it's all over the pages these days. If you want to scale, don't. Stop before you start scaling. And you guys definitely have some different ideas in mind. So what's scaling for you?
I actually wouldn't say so, because that's one of the core tenets of Scrum at Scale. Yes, scaling is in fashion, right? And we're experts on it, but even as experts, we still tell you, don't scale until the very last moment that you can postpone it, because the problem is that as soon as you start scaling, you tend to invite a lot of problems, a lot of complexity into your system. And the much better answer, if you're already doing Scrum, is to invest in your teams, because a lot of teams are really not working at their full potential, because they're missing a lot of stuff. They are not closely adhering to the Scrum guide. They have a lot of organizational impediments. They have a lot of relationship problems within the teams. And we think that there's a lot of opportunity for investment, let's call it that, into the teams so that they can get really good before you start scaling. And the problem is really that it's such a fashionable topic, right? Everybody wants to scale. It's all the latest buzz. And if you're a coach, you can say, oh, I've been coaching 8 teams at the same time, right? When what you should have actually been doing is focusing on one team and making it really good.
Yeah. I remember somebody told me with a pride in her voice that she was coaching 36 teams.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you mentioned the last moment, and what's coming to mind, that last responsible moment. What's last responsible moment for scaling?
I don't know if I would call that, but I made a name of being called in agile transformations that went, let's say, bad, right? And all of them, of course, were scaled. I had a client once that trained 20 teams on a certain framework. They never seen Scrum before. And then they didn't know why it went wrong, right? I mean, you send everybody to training, why it's not working, right? So I wouldn't say you have to wait until the last possible moment, but you have to wait until you have solid knowledge, understanding, and practice of Scrum. And what happens most of the time is people get to these projects, oh, we need to convert from the old system to the new system. Oh, great, let's train everybody to do Scrum, and then since we only have a year to do that, let's get about 50 teams with 600 people doing this, and things go bad. So I think I think when Gereon says the responsible moment is, that is when you have maturity in the teams, at least enough maturity to make sure that people are able to practice things in a way that doesn't get amplified all the bad practices. And that's not usually what we see.
Yes,
So,
and
and as an
let-
agile coach, or as a coach, or an advisor, how do you go about estimating whether the teams are at a maturity you would like them to be to scale?
Yeah, so let me jump on this one. And going back to the question before, one thing I would like to add is, I think there's also a missed opportunity, right? Because the investment that goes into scaling could have gone into the team. And there are a lot of treasures to be found in really investing into the team, and not just on a surface level. Okay, let's send the Scrum Master to a class for 2 days, but actually really investing into the team, because scaling is very expensive. And so how do you know it? Well, it's kind of tricky to say. From a business perspective, I would try to look at diminishing returns on investing into the team. So if you're really like taking that business view. But from a practical viewpoint, what you should always be doing as a coach is helping the team to self-assess, right? So find a way to work with the team on assessing themselves and helping them to find opportunities for growth, and then try to find a point with them where you mutually agree that a lot of improvement in velocity, for example, can't easily be had. And I think that's a good starting point to see, okay, so we are really doing good with this team. There's still a lot of work that needs to be done. Maybe this is a good point to add another team.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this brings to mind different companies I've worked in as an agile coach. And like you said, there's always this big buzz about we've got to scale, we've got to scale. And what I've often seen is the conditions in the company don't exist to even need to scale. And so I'd like to hear from your perspective, what are those conditions that tell a company maybe we need to look at how we scale things?
Let me jump on that one. Like I was telling you guys before we start recording, I work a lot of leadership. And one of the things that I see a lot is leadership doesn't quite understand Scrum, but there is a tendency to copycat. And what I mean by copycat is, well, because so-and-so is doing Scrum and it's working so well, let's do it. But they forget that the company itself does not have the knowledge, does not have the understanding, does not have the structure. The whole premise is starting on a very shaky ground, because you are copycatting without understanding if a particular thing, in this case Scrum, even works for you. It should, it normally will, but you have to first understand what you're trying to achieve with that. And to compound this, they don't want to start small, they want to start really big, which exponentially grows the problem. So I spend a lot of time working with leadership, especially when things went bad, explaining to them how Scrum works and making sure they understand that, so the copycatting stops and they start taking assess the situation, what we did wrong. One of the first things they figured out is we really didn't know what we were doing, and we went to just, oh yeah, it should be very easy. And it isn't, because I have a client right now that Scrum Master doesn't even exist as a job title. And they were having trouble finding Scrum Masters because people don't see a career path. And that was relatively easy to fix, but they didn't know about that. So I think in order to have the conditions there, you have to make sure that the leadership, especially senior leadership, understands what the framework brings to them and what can be achieved with them, and not just simply copycatting, because you cannot change the organization if people don't understand what takes to make that change. Sometimes they even think there's no need for a change, right? But we all know it's quite the opposite.
Yeah. So Q, you mentioned the Scrum Master role, and I think Gereon, you mentioned the Scrum Guide, and that makes me wonder the new changes that have happened in the Scrum Guide in the last few months. How does that impact the work you do, or what's happening with that?
Yeah, so one thing I see, and I think that was the intention behind some of the changes, is that, well, Jeff Sutherland said it, that they are witnessing that a lot of Scrum Masters aren't really doing their job. They're not really performing the role appropriately. And that's why there was this change from a role to a responsibility. And I think some people are misinterpreting it and going too far with it. But I think the general idea behind it was to call out the responsibilities of the Scrum Master more, which isn't to just invite people to meetings and maybe preparing the retro, but is actually being a leader, actually removing impediments, actually working on Kaizen, on continuous improvement items to make the team become quicker. And I think that's a big issue. And Q and I have been having this discussion for a long time, because he is originally a product owner and I'm a Scrum Master. And he was always saying, oh, those Scrum Masters, they don't know what they're doing. And I was like, what are you talking about? The problem are always the product owners. They are the ones that don't know their job. But I actually had to eat my own words there, because I have now seen it. And I totally agree now, because there are Scrum Masters who don't really know what they should be doing. And in turn, the rest of the organization then says, well, we don't know what our Scrum Masters are doing. It's supposed to be a full-time job. And they just go to their Scrum Master meetings and nothing is happening. And if you look at the velocity of the teams, it's not improving. The conflicts in the teams are still there. Nobody's taking care of that. And so I think the problem of Scrum Masters not filling out their role are a big part behind some of the changes. And I do appreciate them. I was a little bit reluctant in the beginning because I really like that term of servant leadership. It really resonates well with me. And now that the focus has been moved to true leader, I actually saw that resonate with a lot of Scrum Masters, that they actually have a bigger role to play and that they should be a little bit more forceful. It's maybe not the right word, but maybe step more into that role and start to affect more things.
I would add, because we have this conversation all the time, like Kevin said, I think the way we train Scrum Masters is pretty defective. And I'll explain why. I just had a new department added to me a couple of months ago. And the first thing I asked the Scrum Masters is, do you know what your percentage of process efficiency is? They didn't even know what I was asking. Then I asked them, can I see your value stream mapping for development? Blank stare. So I think we don't train Scrum Masters properly. I think actually a 2-day class is completely inefficient. You know, when I teach Scrum Master, the minimum I do is 3 days. And I have the advantage, I don't do public classes, I do private classes, so I can tailor them very well. But I also think that one of the things the Scrum Guide brought up forward is we forgot the leadership. I think we taught too much, or servant leadership is completely hands-off. I'm just here to serve. But the Scrum Masters forgot that leadership. And I think a lot of people confuse leadership with management. That's not it. Leadership is actually having your people's backs, is protecting them, is making them efficient. But I think a lot of Scrum Masters, their training is very lacking. They don't understand lean thinking. They don't understand value streaming. They don't understand a lot of things that are core to have process improvement. So I think the Scrum Guide just bringing up this leadership and accountability and all these concepts is actually going to make a favor to sort of wake some people up.
Yeah, and I think the Scrum training, it's a starting point, right? Some people see it as an endpoint. Yeah, I took a 2-day class or a 3-day class and now I'm good to go. And it's actually just the start of your journey. And it is a journey that you have to do. You still have to lift those weights and have to go that way. And so I think there's sometimes confusion about that.
Yeah. So it's clear who of you two is the problem child. It's Gereon. He's a Scrum Master. There's always a problem with Scrum Master. Let's go on to less problematic side, on the product ownership. And we know that at Scrum, well, Scrum is built around products, right? People work together in teams to create great and creative products and solve the problems, right? So how does scaling change approach to product development?
Well, that's on my ballpark. Uh, I think actually, I think Scrum is built around product, but product ownership, it's also not very well understood. And scaling requires product management, which is far more complex and encompassing than product ownership. I think of product ownership as being more tactical, and I think of product management as being more strategic. And what I mean by that is if you go to a team product owner, in most cases, and you ask, hey, what marketing collateral is going out? What are your revenue streams, and how do you intend to monetize this? A lot of them don't get into that, right? Because that comes from somebody usually called the business, right? And that's where the product management is happening. And when we scale, I think one of the beauties of Scrum at scale is putting emphasis on this thing that we call the EMS, the Executive Meta Scrum, which is a central sort of authority, I hate to use that word, that deals with the product management, deals with what's the product direction, how we're going to put this product out of the door, and all those things that are strategic. And then that cascades to the product owners, which can then, in their teams, do the tactical things and make sure that that things are being developed and they meet some criteria of acceptance and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I think even at single team level, a lot of product owners are not familiar with product management and how to do that. And I always tell people, I actually used this in the morning. I was having a meeting today. We are concentrating on output. Output means nothing if it doesn't achieve an outcome. And especially when you use Scrum in IT, it's all about output. We have to get this out. We have to get this out. We have to get this out. Well, I have news for you, right? I use PowerPoint a lot. Maybe I use 10% of it. So the other 90% are output, and that's waste. It's not making my outcome any better. And I think that's one of the problems we see product management, product ownership is they don't emphasize the outcome. I want to have a happy customer. I don't care if I put 20 user stories out or 200. I may put 200 user stories out in production that the users hate. And that's one part that we seem to forget. We are obsessed with output and we forget the importance of the outcome.
So, and I have to recognize that there are definitely different schools of thoughts around product ownership, product management, and you go one way and they say it's all product owner and product owner is responsible for ROI. And you go another way, they say it's product owner works together with product manager, and those are two separate roles, two separate organizations and all that. I think what they all agree on though, and what you are to bring up is that we as community, we are as a trainer community, we don't provide enough of holistic training, we don't provide enough of holistic roadmap for people to develop in their chosen way, whether it's a Scrum Master or a product owner. So I know you both are trainers. How are you thinking about people development in a specific kind of roadmap, if you will?
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. And so when I'm looking at Scrum Masters or at potential Scrum Masters, I'm always looking at their leadership potential first, because that is the arc that they will follow as they develop. How good can they deal with people? Also the serving aspect, right? What kind of leader are they? But that's basically the arc of it. And now we've heard from Q that on the other hand, on the product owner side, the product owner training is also only a starting point, and then it develops into something larger like a product manager, right? And I think there's a lot of there seems to be a lot of confusion because people think they can work as a product owner for a year and then they are a fully fledged product manager, right? As if they could take over a product at Apple and be successful with it. And I think if we construct the roles more as developmental arches in which people can grow over time, I think we're really doing them a service. And so I can just talk for myself. In the beginner classes, the Scrum Master and the product owner, my main focus is on the mindset. There's a lot of material. There's so much material actually that it's kind of difficult to use all of it to get everything across in 2 days. And so what I'm trying to get them to understand is the mindset. So for the Scrum Master is, for example, well, how do you lead the team? How do you support them? How do you achieve flow? Why is it important to take care of impediments, right? Because a lot of people don't seem to really understand that in a sense, the obstacle is the way, right? You could say, well, yeah, my job is to increase the velocity, but what does that mean? Cracking the whip? It's actually the obstacle that is the way, and that's the impediment. The impediment is not something bad, but it's actually the way through which we support our teams and increase velocity and become more productive and become better leaders also.
Mm-hmm. So when I hear you talking about that leadership, it makes me think of coaching, of, you know, the thinking that professional coaching can help people in leadership to take things to the next level. And so I think I get how professional coaching can help Scrum Masters and Agile coaches. And I'm wondering how this actually might connect into the ability to scale. What are your thoughts on that?
I think it's actually more important at scale, right? Mm-hmm. Because when you're talking scaling, you're talking about coaching an organization and not only individual teams. And coaching, actually, it's important to coach teams how to communicate. Cross-team communication is extremely critical, especially when you have a large number of teams, you know, because I work with very large organizations. So for us, having a group with 30, 40 teams is very normal, right? And I see people having difficulties communicating between 4, 5, 6 teams, let alone when there's 30 in there. Mm-hmm. So it's important to have proper coaching to making people understand that without communication, things will not work. Doesn't matter how good your Scrum Master is, how good your product owner is, how good the chief product owner, the chief Scrum Master, all of this, if people have trouble communicating. So it's important to coach leadership about the fundamentals, how the organization should work, but it's also that how the organization should communicate. When we talk about removing impediments, honestly, a lot of the impediments, they could be removed at a lower level much faster if people knew how to communicate. So there's a lot of opportunity for, I always say training works like this. You train people, you mentor them, and then as they mature, you coach them. Mm. And I think people kind of skip steps, or they go into coaching before the team is even able to understand what they're being coached on, and things like that. So there's a lot of opportunity for coaching, especially at scale, because the complexity increases. And therefore, there is even more need at scale than it is at team level only.
Yeah, and so for me, the thing that I really like about Scrum at Scale, and I actually learned this from Q through one of the sessions, coaching sessions, because I was a visitor there at the beginning, and now we're doing them together at least once a month. And so what's really interesting about Scrum at Scale to me is that it seems to really fit well together with professional coaching, in the sense that it's not prescriptive at all. It lays out a basic structure, but that structure is that it can be easily changed, and we're not forcing anyone to do anything. So basically how Scrum at Scale looks is we have 2 cycles, one for the Scrum Master and one for the product owner. And if you look at those, it's basically 2 circles that overlap in some parts. And on these 2 circles, there are bubbles which represent different components. And so one of the components on the Scrum Master side could be cross-team coordination. Another one could be deployment. And on the product owner side, it could be vision or backlog decomposition. And so you have these different components, but we are not telling you how you should do them, right? So is it a good idea to have a vision? Well, probably if you want to have some kind of decentralized command, which you usually want to do in agility because that's where the action is, that's where people have the knowledge, then it's probably good to have a vision, but how you arrive at it, we don't really care about that. Is it useful to have cross-team communication if you have cross-functional teams that are not in functional silos anymore? It's probably a pretty good idea, but we don't really tell you or prescribe how you can do that or how you should do that. And so basically what Scrum at Scale is, it's a network of different components that we think you should use, but that you don't have to use. And the way it's constructed is that it's basically like an API, right? So if we have a component such as the vision, we define the inputs and outputs to that component. And as long as you respect those components, those definitions, the inputs and outputs, you can do the component however you want to use it. And a side benefit of that is that if you want to work on your vision, for example, you still keep the whole system intact, right? It's you only work on that component and the rest of the components aren't affected because it's kind of like a network. It's like a USB slot. It doesn't really care as long as you respect the requirements of the USB slot. You can add a printer to it. You can add a stereo to it. It's really up to you. And this construction, and it took me quite a while, and like I said, Q's input to realize it, it's super well suited to professional coaching in my mind, because you don't have to go in there and kind of sell a system, right? It's not, you have to do this and you have to do that, and you either do it or you're doing it wrong. You can actually go in, see where the client is at, meet them where they are, and focus on the stuff that they want to work on, right? If they say, for us, an issue is cross-team coordination, which is often the case, and you can say, good, let's work on that. And then you can maybe upgrade that a little bit, and you don't interfere with the rest of the company. And you can, that's the funny thing, right? As coaches, we hold the space. And it seems to me like Scrum at Scale is somewhat holding the space, because we just have these loosely coupled components. And so we can just work on that. And then if the customer determines, well, that's looking better now, but our deployment is really bad, let's work on that. And then you can just like follow along with them, and you don't have to force them into kind of a structure that you determine to be right. And so the implementations can look very differently between clients. But that's what I really like, and where I think it's very compatible to professional coaching and what we hold dear. And I sometimes wonder if not more people should be made aware of that, because I think it's a very natural approach to professional coaches to scale Scrum.
So as you're talking, Gereon, I remember what Cherie told me several months ago. She's like, love the guy. He keeps coming back to my classes. He keeps taking classes, and he keeps telling me, I don't want to be a coach. And he keeps coming back. So it sounds like you found the value, you found the application. So how did coaching, professional coaching and skills changed your approach to your practice?
That's a very interesting question, and one I keep asking myself about once a week, especially now that I have a new engagement. And the funny thing is, I would say not very much and everything at the same time. So not very much in the sense that, do I think I'm a much better agile coach because of the professional coaching? I kind of don't, because I think I would have handled a lot of the things the same way. And at the same time, I can't imagine being an agile coach without being a professional coach anymore, because I use it all the time. So for example, you do a one-on-one coaching session and the person starts crying, right? And so what do you do? If you're a professional coach and you keep coaching, then that's completely normal to you. But if you're just an agile coach, suddenly you're completely overwhelmed, and then you start messing up. You have team dynamics that are off. How do you deal with them? Well, you do a coaching session with them, right? And so on one hand, maybe I'm too close to it to really see it. Maybe if somebody would have looked at me from the outside, they would say, well, Gereon, you're completely changed. That's so much is obvious. But I can definitely tell you that I'm using the stuff that I learned from you guys like almost every day.
Just hand them tissues.
No.
I thought I should just stop them.
Yeah. Just tissue, just wipe it off. Who does tears in professional coaching? Come on.
You know, the funny thing is I never had anybody coming crying to me, but they come screaming quite often.
Cry to Gereon, scream to Q. Got it.
Yeah. So I think we should note that I make people cry in agile transformations.
So Q, what about you? What about professional coaching, and maybe with a perspective from the product development?
You know, the funny thing is, I'm known as a product person, but lately I've actually been doing work more with Scrum Master than anything else, you know. So I go both ways, and I grew up as a developer too. So I can tell you one thing. One of the things that professional coaching taught me, it was really hard to learn, is to listen. And we don't do that enough. And if you come from a development background and an engineering background like me, I'm a problem solver. So the moment you're telling me, Q, I have a problem, the third word out of your mouth, I'm already having the solution kind of brewing in here. And when I took my first coaching class, it was really painful to shut your brain, keep your mouth closed, and bloody listen to people. You know? And that made a huge difference. And sometimes I relapse a little bit. I think we all do, you know, because sometimes you are tired or you have some involvement in an issue and etc. But I always keep repeating, shut up and listen, shut up and listen, shut up and listen. And I know you're laughing, but a lot of people fail miserably on that. And we get into a lot of trouble. So if I had to choose one thing I learned from professional coaching that I will never forget is listen, 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 and listen before we start doing anything.
Yeah, let me play.
We're just laughing because we remember all those people who fail at listening.
And actually, if I can build on that, what has changed taking the professional coaching training is I do even less and I have more impact, right? I talk less. Now that Q's been talking, I talk less, I do less, but the impact is much more. And it seems like everything I do is like highly targeted and highly effective. And I think people are sometimes wondering how I do it. And I'm surprised how I do it myself, but it's less of effort and just effortlessly listening to people and then moving at the right time and having a large impact.
Yeah, it's giving them the space to do it and honoring their ability to run their own company. And so that's pretty awesome. When I listen to you talk about this, what I'm hearing is that coaching it's a component, right? It's only one piece, just like Agile is not a silver bullet. Scrum is not a silver bullet. Coaching is not a silver bullet. Scaling is not a silver bullet. It's a component of how we bring success into the client space.
Yeah.
Q.
It's one arrow in your quiver, right? It's a skill that you need. That's why I always emphasize you need training, you need mentoring, you need coaching, right? And you need to progress towards something. And as you mature, you need more coaching, less mentoring, less training, right? So it's part of it. I think one of the advantages of being both a trainer and advisor, and to a certain extent, a coach. I do a lot less coaching than, for instance, Gereon does, but I do some. I have to do some as part of my job. It's important to acquire multiple skills and combine all those skills. The same way that it helps the Scrum if you're familiar with Lean, if you're familiar with Kanban. The more you learn, the more skills you acquire, the best you can deal with people, you can communicate with people, you can offer solutions when they ask you for solutions, which is an advisory role, right? So learning how to coach people helped me a lot, the same way that learning other things helped me a lot too. So it's a skill set that you have to build. I wouldn't advise anybody to claim to be even an advisor, let alone a coach, without having at least basic knowledge of coaching and how to interact with people, because you are probably going to get into a lot of trouble.
Mhm. So, one thing that's been really pleasing to me to hear you say is that you don't install scaling, like take it out the box and just drop it in. This is what we do. Install everything that's in there. And yet, I think that when people go and look at, they go look up Scrum at Scale, they go look up these other scaling models, they buy your book and they're like, oh, let's do this. And they're tempted to just like take it out the box and drop it in. What would you say to those people?
I think, you see, I went to several clients in the past 5-6 years who bought this concept of framework in a box. They dropped the box in there, and everybody start following the box because it's really easy, right? You have the cake recipe, blah, 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 blah. And then after a year and a half, they didn't see a lot of improvement. I mean, yeah, they managed to work in a scaled environment, but they really didn't reap the benefits.
Mhm.
And then when you go there, you start asking questions, and people start to think, well, perhaps we shouldn't have followed the prescription. Because you see, my mother used to be a very good cook, and she never followed any prescription or recipe or anything. She just pulled stuff and put together, because you have to understand the environment, you have to understand the people, you have to understand all of this, and then you can draw some elements with a real framework is not prescriptive, and adopt them and implement them into the environment. So when you go this with this mentality of a box, honestly, it takes about, my experience, about 14 months until things start to not go so well. Or even if they're going well, they are not improving. You are actually not reaping the benefits of having a couple hundred people working on a thing. And that's because people tend to be prescriptive, or they tend to think that the recipe is going to fix your problem. One of the Amazon reviews that we got that I loved is somebody wrote there, these guys are fearless. And then he said, because they pretty much said things that people think they know, but they will never say in public.
Mhm.
And what we did is draw from our experience, from us both, dealing with this thing that people go doing things expecting to follow a recipe, and then things don't work. And that's another reason why you have to have professional coaches, and you have to have not only professional coaches, but also technical coaches, right? You have to have a lot of this, because it's when people start to have questions and they don't know where to go. The prescription doesn't tell you that. The prescription is not there every day to say, well, we're having a quality problem in there, and our developers don't know this and this and that. So where's the technical coach there? Or we have personal problems with people who are unsure they're even going to have a job with all these changes that were, where are the coaches in there? So I think I fear this box solutions. People, it's like asking people to wear the same size of clothing. It's not going to work, right? So,
So
G, you want to add anything?
Yeah, I just think so. I personally think that if you have an overly prescriptive system for agility or for scaling agility, you're not being agile at all. It goes against the core value of it, and I frankly don't care for it. I'm a deep believer in decentralizing decision making. I'm a deep believer in agility, because I think it's mandated by environmental changes, right? So if I lived in the Middle Ages and nothing changes that much, and we live in a feudal system, you don't need agility, right? It's very specific to our time and to our to our way of working, which is knowledge work. And so these prescriptive systems, they don't really make sense to me. I'm all about agility. That's what I love, and that's what I think makes sense. And so doing agility with a prescriptive system is a contradiction in terms to me.
You know, it's funny. I can totally see Gereon saying in his quiet German demeanor, "You're not agile at all."
They're not. No, they're not. But the truth is, they're paying for people's cars, right? So, yeah.
So
he tends to be a lot nicer than I am when I say something. You know?
I could hear it coming out completely differently between the two of you.
So while we are on the culinary Scrum trip, interesting. So what is your guys' recipe for that fearlessness in your work?
I don't know if there is a recipe. I think it's just after 15 years of Scrum and 30 years of software, I think you just learn that you have to be fair with people, but you have to be very precise. I don't like to waste time. I think time is very precious and it's very costly. So I will report to leadership what I see in the way I see it. I am not going to use fancy words. I'm not going to say, hey, you know, let's beat around the bush with this. I think my recipe is, I'm a very honest and frank person. I always been my whole life. And Scrum, one of the Scrum values is courage. If you don't have the courage to come forward and tell people the truth, yeah, okay, so do you want to fire me because I told you the truth? That's fine. Your problem is not going to be solved because you're going to, you heard something you didn't want to hear. So that's the way I go about it. I tell things for what they are. I tell things as I see them in my experience. I may be wrong at times, and at times I've been, you know, we all are. But I don't like to pretend that something is a little better than what it is just because it makes leadership feel better. Because in the end, that's going to make you spend a lot of money. You're going to make a lot of people unhappy. And your product is not going to get any better. Your stock price is going to go down. And unless you go to Reddit and ask people to go buy your stock like crazy to pump the price out. But I think being honest and having the courage to be honest, I think a lot of us were very timid. And I prefer to be very frank, very honest, and very direct, because there's no point in trying to pretend that something it's not happening because a leadership is going to be happy about this and I save my skin, right? And that you're not solving the problem. And eventually something is going to happen and well, why didn't you tell me that? You know, so I always been very direct. I got in trouble for being direct multiple times, but analyzing that, I say, you know what? I'd rather not be working there anyway. Mm-hmm. So, Mr. G.
Yeah, and so for me, it's this issue of being good with the outcome, whatever it is, right? So kind of like being agendaless, being like in a sense egoless, right? Of course, I have some aspirations or some hopes for what they're going to do, but I can't really influence that. I can help them, I can mirror stuff to them, I can support them. But in the end, it's their company, it's their decision to make, it's their life, and I'm there to support them. But in the end, I'm good with any outcome.
Mm-hmm. So, and with you guys, the book is out of the way. It's it's history. It's out there. Seems like you're getting pretty good reviews. What's next for you?
So who wants to go first? So let me go first again. So we're gonna have the audiobook coming out pretty soon. So that's gonna be a nice addition for those who want to learn more about Scrum at Scale, but don't necessarily want to read the whole book, but want to listen to it on the subway or on the car commute. And so for me, I'm very happy. I'm working with a customer where pretty much everybody from top leadership to the employees is completely bought in. And so we're doing a full Scrum at scale transformation in a hardware producing company with a lot of regulatory complications. So it's super interesting. And so, yeah, that's it for me. If anybody wants to reach me, I'm at teamflow.net. And Q, what about you?
Well, one thing that's very dear and near to me besides the book, I mean, we did the podcast, the audiobook is coming. You can find the podcast in places where you find your normal podcasts. It has a little bit from each one of the chapters of the book. I'm very fond of the coaching sessions we do every month. We are on the third year together doing this. We had hundreds of people in there. We get a lot of good feedback. I learned a lot doing them. We get questions that would never imagine that somebody would ask, which makes us better trainers, better mentors, better coaches. You can find me at raskere.com. And if you look under resources in there, you can see all the coaching sessions. They happen every month. They are free. We've been doing this, like I said, for 3 years. We helped a lot of people, and I'm very proud of the work that both of us have been doing with that. And I hope we'll be doing it for a long time. Beyond that, I don't know. I have a few ideas. Gereon and I always talking about stuff, so stay tuned.
All right. So we definitely wish you a lot of luck and great success, and hopefully you will continue talking, and there will be a lot of great ideas that you will bring to life, and whatever that results in, I'm definitely looking forward to it. And well, that was another episode of Tandem Coaching Academy's Keeping Agile Coaching Non-Denominational Podcast. We had Q and Gereon today, and we talked about scrumming at scale. And we are your hosts today, Shuri Silas and I, Alex Kudnov. Bye now.